Welcome to a journey through the dark corridors of a castle where time seems to have stopped, where whispers of the past echo through empty halls, and where a young woman will discover that sometimes it is necessary to awaken not just a sleeping king, but an entire soul lost in darkness. This is a story about encounters that transform destinies, about the silent courage of those forgotten by the world, and about how true love knows no barriers of class or title. It is a narrative that reminds us that within each of us there is a castle with locked rooms, waiting for the right key to open its doors. Initial hook, 50 seconds. Imagine for a moment that you wake up in a world where everything you knew has vanished, where 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye, and where only a kind stranger remains by your side, whispering hope into your ears. What if I told you that this person would be able to change not only your life, but an entire kingdom? Today, we will discover together this extraordinary story of Meg and Edmund in the somber castle of Ravenshade. But first, tell me, where are you watching this story from? From the icy mountains, the bustling cities, or perhaps some cozy corner of the world? Leave your city in the comments. I love knowing where our listeners are. And since we're starting this journey together, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you believe in the transformative power of stories. Every like motivates me to keep bringing these narratives to you. Year, 1847. Location, Ravenshade Castle, Kingdom of Raven's Hollow. The wind howled between the Gothic towers like an ancient lament, carrying snowflakes that were lost in the stony vastness of Ravenshade Castle. It was a particularly cruel January night, the kind that makes the bravest hearts tremble in their chests, when Margaret Whitmore first set foot in the castle's main courtyard. Her small feet, wrapped in worn-out boots that had known many journeys, sank into the fresh snow. The sound was almost musical, a soft whisper that contrasted with the fierce roar of the wind. Meg, as she had been known since childhood, raised her golden eyes to behold the somber grandeur that would be her new home. The ancient stones seemed to weep tears of ice. Each Gothic window was a blind eye, each tower a silent sentinel guarding secrets that time had layered with dust. There was something in the architecture of the place that whispered stories of better times, when the flames in the hearths danced joyfully and laughter echoed through the corridors. "Child?" The voice cut through the cold air like a blade. Lady Catherine Thornfield emerged from the main entrance, her tall and rigid figure framed by the yellowish light that spilled from within. At 45, the governess possessed the austere beauty of women who had learned to harden their hearts to protect them. Her greying hair was tied in an impeccable bun, and her steel-blue eyes seemed capable of reading even the most secret thoughts. "Lady Catherine," Meg curtsied respectfully, even as she felt her knees tremble, not just from the cold but from the imposing presence of the woman before her. "Come inside. The night is too cruel for conversations outdoors." Catherine did not wait for a reply. She simply turned and walked back inside, expecting Meg to follow. The castle's interior was a disturbing contrast. While the exterior screamed of neglect, the main corridors still held vestiges of greatness. Faded tapestries telling epic stories, silver candelabras reflecting the trembling candlelight, and portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow every move. "You are the daughter of Thomas Whitmore, the blacksmith from Millbrook?" The question came without preamble as they walked down a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. "Yes, milady, I was." Meg's voice came out weaker than she intended. The memories of her father, his calloused hands, the smell of hot iron, the warm smiles, were still open wounds in her heart. Catherine stopped abruptly before an oak door. "Was. I understand." There was a pause that seemed to carry the weight of many losses. "You will sleep here. Your duties begin at dawn. Cleaning, maintenance, care of the main chambers." She handed Meg a heavy key. "There is only one absolute rule in this castle, child, and you would do well to etch it in cast iron upon your memory." Meg held the key, feeling the cold metal against her warm palm. "Never, under any circumstances, are you to approach the royal chambers on the 3rd floor of the East Tower. Never." Catherine's voice lowered to a whisper that seemed to carry echoes of ancient tragedies. "There rests our king, Edmund of Ravenshollow, and his sleep is sacred. Is he ill?" The question escaped before Meg could contain it. Catherine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "He sleeps, child. For 5 long years he has slept, and all the physicians in the kingdom agree that he will never awaken. What rests in that tower is no longer a man, but a preserved memory of what our sovereign was." Meg lowered her eyes, feeling she had transgressed some invisible boundary. "Lord Aldrich Blackwood, rules the kingdom as regent. He is a just and wise man, and you would do well to show him the same respect you would show the king himself. Catherine opened the bedroom door. Sleep well, Margaret Whitmore. Tomorrow your work will begin, and you will discover that Ravenshade holds more secrets than a young woman can imagine. Meg entered the small room, clean, simple, with an iron bed, a wooden desk, and a window overlooking the snow-covered gardens. When she turned to thank her, Lady Catherine had already vanished, leaving only the echo of her footsteps fading into the corridor's darkness. Alone for the first time in her new home, Meg approached the window. Outside, the storm continued its furious dance, but something caught her attention. A single light shone in the east tower like a solitary star piercing the night. Was someone truly sleeping there for 5 years? And why did Lady Catherine seem to carry so much fear in her eyes when she spoke of it? The dawn arrived shyly over Ravenshade, tinting the snow with rosy hues that seemed to whisper promises of hope. Meg awoke to the soft sound of distant bells, not the joyous bells of celebration her mother had described from old royal mornings, but the melancholic bells that merely marked the inexorable passage of time. She put on her simple grey dress, braided her honey-coloured hair into a practical plait, and went down to find her duties. The castle corridors took on a different personality in the daylight, less menacing, yet infinitely more melancholic. It was like observing the faded beauty of a rose pressed between the pages of a forgotten book. In the kitchen, she found Agnes McKenna, a 55-year-old woman whose white hair was kept under an impeccable cap. Her green eyes held the wisdom of one who had witnessed both joys and sorrows, and her calloused hands told stories of decades of dedicated service. "So you're the new girl," Agnes said with a smile that carried genuine warmth. Thomas Whitmore was a good man, used to forge the best horseshoes in the entire region. Meg felt a tightness in her chest, hearing her father's name mentioned with such tenderness. "Come, child, have something to eat before you start." Agnes served hot porridge seasoned with cinnamon and honey. "You'll need your strength. The castle is large, and Lady Catherine, well, she has her demands." As she ate, Meg listened to Agnes talk about the daily routine, but there was something in the way the older woman avoided mentioning certain areas of the castle, as if some words were forbidden to be spoken. "Agnes," Meg ventured cautiously, "Lady Catherine mentioned that the king sleeps. For how long exactly?" Agnes's spoon stopped mid-air. For a moment, her eyes were lost on some distant point, as if seeing ghosts of old memories. 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days, she replied with a precision that surprised Meg. "It was an autumn morning when we found His Majesty unconscious in his chambers. The physicians said he had suffered some kind of collapse. Since then," she shook her head sadly, "since then the kingdom has never been the same." "And Lord Blackwood?" The name seemed to cast a shadow over Agnes's face. "Lord Aldrich is a man of ambitions. He rules with a firm hand, that is true. But there are those who whisper that perhaps his firmness is excessive, that perhaps he has grown too accustomed to the power temporarily entrusted to him." Before Meg could ask more questions, Lady Catherine appeared in the kitchen like a silent spectre. "Margaret, I trust you have eaten properly. There is much work ahead." Her voice cut through the conversation like a sharp blade. "Agnes, I need you to prepare the main hall chambers for Lord Blackwood's visit this afternoon." Agnes gave a quick curtsy and began to move with practiced efficiency. "Come, child. We will begin with the royal library." Meg followed Catherine through corridors that seemed to tell silent stories. The royal library was a cathedral of knowledge. Oak shelves rose to the vaulted ceiling, housing thousands of leather-bound volumes. Light filtered through stained glass windows, creating dancing patterns on the reading tables. "Your mother," Catherine said suddenly, making Meg stop contemplating the magnificence around her. "She knew how to read, did she not?" "Yes, milady. She taught me before." Meg's voice faltered. "Before she passed." "I understand." Catherine walked to one of the shelves, running her fingers over the spines of the books like one caressing old friends. "That skill will be useful. Many of the volumes here require special care, cataloguing, preservation. It is delicate work, requiring not only careful hands, but also a mind capable of understanding the importance of what it is touching." Meg felt a strange emotion swell in her chest. Since her parents' death, she had assumed her reading and writing skills would be wasted on manual labor. Discovering that she could use the gift her mother had given her was like finding a small flame of hope in the midst of darkness. "You will begin here every morning," Catherine continued, "cleaning, organizing, cataloguing the volumes that need restoration. But remember, some knowledge is dangerous, child. If you find documents you do not fully understand, bring them to me first. For the next few hours, Meg worked in silence, discovering that each book seemed to hold not just words, but also memories. There were volumes on the kingdom's history, medical treatises, collections of poetry that spoke of lost loves and renewed hopes. And then, hidden behind a row of military treatises, she found something that made her heart race. A diary bound in brown leather, with the initials ER engraved in gold on the cover. Edmund of Ravenshollow, the sleeping king. Meg looked around, making sure she was alone, and carefully opened the first page. The handwriting was elegant, masculine, and the words seemed to pulse with a life of their own. There is something wrong in the kingdom. I can feel it in the shadows that lengthen in the corridors, in the whispers that fall silent when I approach, in the gazes that turn away when I seek sincerity. Lord Aldrich has shown himself to be overly solicitous in his counsel. I must uncover the truth before it is too late. Meg's hands trembled. This was the king's personal diary, and the entries were dated just a week before he fell into the mysterious sleep. What secrets had he discovered? What truths had been buried along with Edmund's consciousness? Outside, the first shadows of the afternoon began to spread across the snow-covered gardens, and in the east tower, a single light continued to shine, as if someone or something kept an eternal vigil. Meg closed the diary, but she could not get it out of her mind. She had awakened to much more than a new job in that castle. She had awakened to a mystery that could change everything she thought she knew about sleeping kings and lost kingdoms. The weeks unfolded in Ravenshade like pages of a book written in pale ink, where each day seemed a melancholic repetition of the last. Meg had settled into a comforting routine, waking before dawn, working in the library until noon, caring for the main chambers in the afternoon, and returning to her small room when night embraced the castle. But there was something unsettling growing in her consciousness, like a distant melody heard only in the deepest moments of silence. They were small things at first. A book she was sure she had left closed would appear open to a specific page. A candle she had carefully extinguished before leaving the library would be burning again when she returned. Footsteps echoing in the upper corridors in the dead of night, when everyone should have been asleep. Lady Catherine, when questioned about these small mysteries, would reply with her usual icy smile, "Old castles have their quirks, child. Drafts, wood that expands and contracts, an imagination overstimulated by solitude." But Meg knew it was not her imagination. There was something or someone moving through the shadows of Ravenshade. In the third week, the dreams began. They were vivid dreams, charged with a reality that made the waking world seem faded in comparison. Meg would find herself walking through the castle's corridors, but not the corridors as she knew them by day. These were corridors bathed in golden light, where tapestries glowed with vibrant colors and the sound of distant laughter echoed off the stones. And always, always there was a voice, a deep, melodious male voice that whispered her name like a caress. Margaret, Margaret. She would wake up with a racing heart, her hands reaching for something that wasn't there, her ears still ringing with the echo of that voice that seemed to know the most secret corners of her soul. During the day, she tried to concentrate on her tasks, but she found herself looking out the window toward the east tower with a frequency that disturbed her. The light was still there night after night, like a beacon calling lost ships home. It was on a particularly cold February afternoon that Meg made her first truly disturbing discovery. She was organizing documents in the library when she heard low voices coming from the corridor. Instinctively, she hid behind one of the tall shelves, her heart quickening without knowing exactly why. Lord Aldrich Blackwood entered the library, accompanied by a man Meg did not recognize. Tall, thin, with graying hair and small, calculating eyes. Blackwood was exactly as she had imagined him, a man in his 40s at the height of his power, with broad shoulders, impeccably styled dark hair, and a presence that filled any room. But there was something in his dark eyes that made her feel a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "The preparations are nearly complete," the unknown man was saying in a low voice. "Lord Brennan's letters were intercepted as planned. He will never know that his terms of alliance were altered." Blackwood chuckled softly, a sound that held no warmth. "Perfect. And what about the other arrangements?" "The dosage has been gradually increased. Dr. Morrison assures us there is no risk of awakening for at least another 6 months. Ample time to consolidate the final arrangements." Meg felt the blood freeze in her veins. Dosage? What were they talking about? "Excellent. Soon, the kingdom of Ravenshollow will be officially protected by our friends from the north, and I will be recognized no longer as regent, but as the rightful successor to a king who unfortunately never awoke from his mysterious illness. The footsteps moved away, leaving Meg alone with a racing heart and a mind in turmoil. What arrangements were these? What dosage kept someone unconscious? And more importantly, could it be that the king's sleep was not as natural as everyone believed? That night, Meg could not sleep. Lying in her narrow bed, she watched the solitary light in the east tower through her window. Why was that light still on if the king was in a deep coma? Who kept it lit? The hours dragged on until, just before dawn, she made a decision that would change everything. She rose silently, put on her warmest robe and left her room. The moonlit castle corridors were a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, but Meg walked with determination toward the east tower. Each step echoed like a heartbeat on the ancient stones. She passed portraits of ancestral kings, whose eyes seemed to follow her with silent disapproval. She climbed spiral staircases that seemed to rise endlessly, until she finally reached the third floor. There, before an oak door carved with royal crests, Meg stopped. The light she had seen from her window seeped from under the door, golden and warm like melted honey. Her hand trembled as she touched the doorknob. From inside the room, so faint it could have been her imagination, came a sound that made her world stop spinning. Someone was whispering her name. Margaret. This time, she was certain she wasn't dreaming. The following morning brought a thick fog that enveloped Ravenshade like a silver shroud, turning the castle into a mysterious island floating between sky and earth. Meg awoke with her hands still trembling from the previous night. She had remained before the royal chamber's door for long minutes, listening to the whispers that seemed to call her name, but in the end she had not dared to enter. Now, working mechanically in the library, her mind could not stray from that moment. What secrets did that room hold, and why did she feel that her own life had become inexorably intertwined with the mysteries of Ravenshade? It was while cleaning a rarely visited section of the library that Meg made her second major discovery. Hidden behind dusty volumes of medieval agricultural treatises, she found a small area that seemed to have been deliberately concealed, a niche in the wall where documents had been carefully preserved. Her hands trembled as she removed the papers. There were letters sealed with crests she did not recognize, official documents in different handwritings, and at the bottom of the hiding place, more pages from the royal diary she had discovered weeks earlier. With a racing heart, Meg began to read. The letters were correspondence between Lord Blackwood and nobles from neighboring kingdoms, coded conversations about mutual protection, regional stability, and necessary transitions. But one letter in particular made Meg's blood run cold. My dear Aldrich, the preparations for the protection of Ravenshollow proceed as planned. Our northern allies are eager to formalize the new territorial arrangements. As for the main obstacle, we trust that your medical expertise will continue to ensure he remains unconscious until all documents are signed and sealed. Lord Brennan. Meg reread the letter 3 times before its implications fully crystallized in her mind. Not only was the king's sleep artificial, there was an entire plan to hand over the kingdom to foreign powers, while Edmund remained unconscious. With increasingly trembling hands, she turned to the pages of the royal diary. These were entries she had not seen before, dated from the last days before the king fell into his mysterious sleep. October 15th. I intercepted a conversation today between Aldrich and a man I did not recognize. They spoke of deadlines and urgent needs. When I approached, the conversation ceased abruptly. Something is being plotted in the shadows of my own castle. October 17th. Dr. Morrison has been insisting on new tonics for my health. I feel strangely tired after taking them, as if a fog is descending upon my mind. I will begin to secretly dispose of these medicines. October 19th. I found documents on my desk that I do not remember signing. Trade agreements with kingdoms we have traditionally considered rivals. When I questioned Aldrich, he said I had approved everything during a meeting I do not recall happening. My memory has been hazy. The last entry was written in a shaky hand, clearly by someone fighting against a growing disorientation. October 21st. I know something terrible is happening. I can feel my consciousness slipping like sand through my fingers. If anyone ever finds this diary, know that Edmund of Ravenshollow would never voluntarily surrender his kingdom. Protect Ravenshollow. Protect. The entry ended abruptly, the quill clearly having fallen from the writer's hand. Meg closed the diary with tears in her eyes. The king had discovered the conspiracy against him, but too late. He had been silenced before he could expose the treachery brewing in his own castle. But if he had been kept unconscious for 5 years through medication, how to explain the light in his window? How to explain the whispers she was sure she had heard? The sound of approaching footsteps made Meg quickly hide all the documents back in the secret niche. Lady Catherine appeared at the library entrance, her steel eyes seeming to read every secret Meg was trying to hide. "Margaret," the governess said, with that voice that always carried an unquestionable authority, "Lord Blackwood wishes to see you in his private chambers." Now, Meg's heart nearly stopped. Could they have discovered her investigations, her nightly visits to the corridors near the East Tower? "May I ask why, milady?" Catherine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Lord Blackwood is not in the habit of explaining his decisions to servants, child. You would do well to go immediately, and with a respectful attitude." As she followed Catherine through the corridors, she now knew, like the lines on her own palm, Meg felt as though she were walking toward her own fate. Lord Blackwood's chambers were in the West Tower, in complete opposition to the East Tower, where the king supposedly slept his eternal sleep. The irony was not lost on her. The usurper had chosen to live as far as possible from the man he was betraying. Before the door to the regent's chambers, Catherine stopped and fixed Meg with a gaze that seemed capable of reading souls. "Remember, child," she whispered with an intensity that made Meg take a step back, "not all secrets are safe to know, and some curiosities can be fatal." The door opened before Meg could reply, revealing Lord Blackwood in all his imposing presence. His smile was charming, but his dark eyes seemed capable of seeing through any lie. "Ah, young Margaret," he said in a voice as smooth as velvet, "please, come in. We have much to discuss." Meg crossed the threshold, feeling as if she were stepping into the wolf's den. Behind her, the door closed with a definitive click that echoed like a pronounced sentence. Lord Blackwood's chambers were a study in controlled opulence. Polished mahogany furniture, rich tapestries in the colors of the royal crest, a crackling fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the walls. But it was the desk that caught Meg's attention, papers organized in precise stacks, a silver inkwell, and several small glass vials containing liquids of various colors. "Sit, my dear," Blackwood said, indicating an upholstered chair in front of his desk. His voice was polite, almost paternal, but there was something in his eyes that made Meg feel like a mouse being watched by a snake. Meg obeyed, keeping her hands clasped in her lap to hide the trembling she couldn't control. "Lady Catherine informs me that you have been adapting well to your duties," he continued, walking slowly around the chair where she sat, "particularly in the library. It is rare to find a young woman of your background with such developed reading skills." "My mother taught me, my lord." "Ah, yes? Your late mother." He stopped behind her, and Meg could feel his presence like a cold shadow. "And what exactly have you been reading in our library, Margaret?" The question was asked with such casualty that it almost sounded innocent. Almost. "Mostly catalogues, my lord. Books in need of restoration. Inventories." "Inventories. How methodical of you." He moved back to stand in front of her, leaning against the desk. "And do these inventories include historical documents, personal correspondences, diaries, perhaps?" Meg's heart pounded, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "Only what Lady Catherine authorizes me to handle, my lord." Blackwood studied her face for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, Lady Catherine is very careful about what she allows our staff to access." He moved away from the desk, walking to the window that overlooked the snow-covered gardens. "Tell me, Margaret, what do you know about our beloved king?" "That he sleeps, my lord, for 5 years." "Sleeps?" Blackwood repeated the word as if savoring its meaning. "A delicate way to put it. The truth is more complex. Our king suffered what the physicians classify as a cerebral collapse, a degenerative condition that keeps him in a vegetative state. There is no hope of recovery." Meg forced herself to appear to accept this information as truth, though every word sounded like a lie in her ears. "It must be very difficult for all who love him," she said carefully. "Our love?" Blackwood turned from the window, and for a moment Meg saw something dangerous glint in his eyes. "Love can be both a strength and a weakness, don't you think? It can lead us to make irrational choices." He returned to the desk and picked up one of the glass vials. The liquid inside was clear, almost like water. For example, someone who loved our sleeping king too much might get the foolish idea to try and awaken him somehow. They might even ignore specific orders about not approaching his chambers. Meg's blood ran cold. He knew. Somehow, Blackwood knew about her nocturnal walks. "My lord, I would never—" "Of course not," he interrupted her smoothly. "You are a sensible young woman. You understand that interfering with our king's medical care would be not only dangerous for him but also treacherous." He placed the vial back on the desk, but kept his fingers on it. "Dr. Morrison has developed a very specific regimen of care to keep our king comfortable. Any interruption to this treatment could cause him unnecessary suffering. You wouldn't want to cause your king suffering, would you, Margaret?" "No, my lord. Never." "Excellent." Blackwood smiled again, and this time there was a predatory satisfaction in his expression. "Then we can count on your continued discretion, and on your obedience to the rules established by Lady Catherine." Meg curtsied. "Yes, my lord. You may go, and Margaret," he called as she was at the door, "remember that curiosity, while a virtue in librarians, can be a dangerous vice in other circumstances." Meg left the chambers with shaky legs, feeling as if she had just escaped a trap by a matter of millimeters, but she was also certain that Blackwood had revealed more than he intended. The vials on his desk, the way he spoke of medical treatment, the veiled threat, it all confirmed her suspicions. King Edmund was not in a natural coma. He was being kept unconscious. That afternoon, Meg sought out Agnes in the kitchen. The older woman was kneading bread, her experienced hands working the dough with rhythmic, comforting motions. "Agnes," Meg said cautiously, "may I ask a question about before?" Agnes's hands paused for a moment. "Before? Before the king fell asleep. Were you here when it happened?" Agnes continued to knead the dough, but Meg noticed her movements had become tenser. "I was. I've served in this castle for 30 years, child. I've seen kings born and raised. I've seen joys and sorrows." "What was he like?" "King Edmund." A soft smile lit up Agnes's aged face. "Oh, he was a good man. Fair, kind to the servants, concerned for his people. He used to come to the kitchen when he was a prince to steal still warm biscuits." Her hand stopped again. "He didn't deserve what happened to him." "What exactly happened to him?" Agnes looked around, making sure they were alone. Then, in a low voice, she began to tell a story that made Meg's heart ache. "In the weeks before he fell asleep, His Majesty seemed troubled. He said he felt something was wrong, that secrets were being kept from him. Dr. Morrison began visiting him daily, saying the king needed tonics for his health. And then one morning Lady Catherine went to wake him for an important meeting and found him unconscious. Dr. Morrison said he had suffered a sudden collapse, that his brain had been irreversibly damaged. Tears began to well in Agnes's eyes. "But I saw the vials, child. I saw Dr. Morrison mixing strange liquids into the tonics, and after the king fell asleep, he continued to visit him daily, always carrying his medical bag." Meg felt all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place in her mind. "Agnes, do you think he is still being medicated?" The older woman looked at her with eyes full of tears and fear. "Child, there are things that are dangerous to think, let alone speak of." She moved closer to Meg, lowering her voice to a desperate whisper. "But sometimes, late at night, I hear sounds coming from the East Tower, as if someone is struggling, as if someone is trying to wake up." The two women looked at each other in silence for a long moment, the weight of the unspoken truth hanging between them like a storm cloud. Finally, Agnes returned to her dough, but her tears fell silently onto the flour. "God help our poor king," she whispered, "and God help us all." 3 nights after her conversation with Agnes, Meg lay awake in her narrow bed, watching the moon's shadows dance across her ceiling. The wind howled between the castle stones, like the voices of ancient spirits, and she couldn't banish the image of the vials on Blackwood's desk or the tears in Agnes's eyes from her mind. A storm was brewing outside. She could feel it in the air pressure, in the way the curtains fluttered even with the window closed. It was as if the castle itself were restless, as if the ancient stones were whispering secrets that should have been revealed long ago. Around midnight, when even the wind had quieted, Meg made a decision that would change everything. She rose silently, wrapped herself in her thickest robe, and left her room. The moonlit castle corridors had an ethereal quality, as if they were made of silver mist and crystallized memories. Every step of her bare feet on the cold stone echoed like a heartbeat. This time, when she reached the door of the royal chambers in the East Tower, she did not hesitate. The handle turned smoothly under her hand, and the door opened with only the slightest creak. The golden light she had seen so many times from her window now enveloped her like a warm embrace, revealing a room that took her breath away. The royal chambers were not what she had expected. Instead of the opulent grandeur of the other castle rooms, this space possessed a more intimate, more personal beauty. Books were scattered on a table near the window, as if someone had just been reading them. Candles burned in silver holders, creating golden circles of light that pushed back the shadows. And on the large bed with dark blue velvet canopies, Meg stifled a cry. The man who lay there did not look like a patient who had been in a coma for 5 years. His dark brown hair, though long, still had a luster. His skin, though pale, had a healthy tone that spoke of life, not decay. And his lips moved almost imperceptibly, as if he were whispering words only he could hear. Meg approached slowly, as if walking on sacred ground. Up close, she could see that he was young, not much older than herself, perhaps in his early 30s. There was a dormant strength in his features, a nobility that not even the forced sleep had managed to erase. And then, when she was just a few feet from the bed, something happened that made her world stand still. Edmund of Ravenshallow's eyes opened, not fully, just a slit, as if he were fighting against a heavy darkness that tried to keep him submerged. But they were conscious eyes, conscious and recognizing her. "Margaret," he whispered, and his voice was exactly as she had heard it in her dreams, deep, melodious, laden with a pain that pierced the heart. "You came." Meg was trembling so much she could barely stand. "Your Majesty, you are—" "Can you see me?" A ghostly smile touched Edmund's lips. How long have you been coming here?" "This is the first time I've entered, Your Majesty, but I heard your voice calling me. I have been trying." Each word seemed to require immense effort. For weeks, and trying to reach someone, anyone who could hear. Meg fell to her knees beside the bed, her hands trembling as they reached for his. When their fingers touched, it was as if an electric current passed between them. "Your Majesty, everyone thinks you have been in a coma for 5 years." "5?" Edmund's eyes shut tight, as if the pain of the revelation were physical. 5 lost years. There are moments when I wake, moments when I can think clearly. But then the doctor comes, and I sleep again. Dr. Morrison. Yes, the word came out like an angry hiss. He and Blackwood. I've heard fragments of conversations. They believe I'm completely unconscious, but sometimes I can hear. Meg gently squeezed his hand. "What did you hear?" "Plans. Plans to hand my kingdom over to foreign powers. Blackwood. He will declare me dead soon and take the throne as my chosen successor." Edmund tried to sit up, but the effort was too much, and he fell back onto the pillows. "Margaret, you must warn someone. You must expose the truth." "Who?" "Lady Catherine obeys Blackwood. Agnes is afraid, and I am just a servant." Edmund's eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "You are not just anything, Margaret Whitmore. You are the only person in this entire castle who had the courage to seek the truth. The only one who came when I called. How did you know my name? I have been watching you. In the moments I can maintain consciousness. You work in the library, read the books I used to read, walk the corridors where I used to walk. It's as if—" He paused, his eyes searching for the right words. "It's as if my soul recognizes yours." Tears began to stream down Meg's cheeks. "Your Majesty, how can I help you? First, do not call me Your Majesty when we are alone. My name is Edmund." His hand squeezed hers with more strength than she would have thought possible for someone in his condition. "And second, I need you to find a way to stop the medications. If you can stop what Dr. Morrison administers to me for just a few days, perhaps I can regain enough strength to—" His voice failed as the sound of footsteps echoed in the distant corridor. "You must go," he whispered urgently. "If they find you here, I will come back," Meg promised, rising quickly. "I will find a way to help you. Margaret," he called to her as she was heading for the door. "Thank you for not giving up on me when everyone else did." She turned to look at him one last time. Even in the golden gloom of the candles, even with the pallor of his long captivity, Edmund of Ravenshollow was the most handsome man she had ever seen. But it was not just his appearance that touched her. It was the indomitable strength that shone in his eyes, the dignity that not even 5 years of chemical imprisonment could break. "I will never give up," she whispered back. "I promise." And she left the room carrying in her heart not only the secret of an awakened king, but also the weight of a love that had been born the moment their hands touched. Outside, the storm had truly begun, with lightning illuminating the night sky, as if the heavens themselves were witnessing the awakening of something that would forever change the destinies of Ravenshade. The days following her first meeting with Edmund passed in a succession of moments that alternated between ecstasy and terror. By day, Meg carried out her duties with mechanical movements, her mind lost in plans of how to help the king without arousing suspicion. By night, she lay awake counting the hours until she could visit him again. She had discovered that Dr. Morrison made his visits always in the early morning and late afternoon, times when Meg began to religiously avoid the East Tower. But in the dead of night, when the castle slept deeply, she became a silent shadow moving through the corridors to the royal chambers. Edmund always waited for her, now awake, as if her presence had the power to keep him conscious against all the chemicals that tried to drag him back into darkness. With each visit, he seemed a little more alert, a little more present, like a plant finally receiving sunlight after months of darkness. "Tell me about yourself," he asked during one of these nightly visits, his voice stronger than in their first encounters. "I want to know how an orphan girl became the bravest person in my kingdom." Meg smiled sadly, adjusting the pillows behind him so he could sit up more comfortably. In the last few days, Edmund had regained enough strength to sit up for short periods. "I am not brave, Edmund. In fact, I spend most of my time terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear," he said softly. "It is acting in spite of it. And you have done that every night." Seated in the chair she had pulled close to the bed, Meg began to tell him about her childhood, about the blacksmith father who taught her that honest work was the greatest dignity one could have, about the mother who gave her the gift of reading and writing even knowing she might never be able to use those skills. "They died last winter," she said, her voice growing softer. "A fever that swept through all of Millbrook. I survived, but sometimes I wonder why." Edmund reached out to touch her hand. "You survived to be here, to find me when I most needed hope. Or perhaps you survived so that I could find you," she retorted with a small but genuine smile. During these nightly conversations, Edmund told her about his own life, about growing up knowing he would one day be responsible for thousands of lives, about the loneliness of power, about how he had begun to suspect the treachery brewing in his own castle. "I was naive," he admitted on a particularly cold night, when Meg had brought hot tea secretly prepared in the kitchen. "I trusted Blackwood completely. He was my father's advisor. He seemed genuinely concerned for the kingdom. I never imagined his loyalty was just a mask for his ambition." "How did you begin to suspect?" "Small things. Decisions being made without my approval, foreign visitors I hadn't authorized, changes in the kingdom's traditional alliances." Edmund paused to take a sip of the tea, savoring its warmth. "And then I found letters. Letters that suggested I was being deceived about much more than I had imagined. The letters I found in the library." Edmund nodded gravely. "Probably. I had hidden copies of everything I discovered, waiting for the right moment to expose the conspiracy. But Blackwood was smarter, or more impatient." Meg held his hand more firmly. "Edmund, we have to stop the medications completely. You are getting stronger, but still not enough to confront Blackwood publicly." "I know, but how?" "Dr. Morrison is extremely careful. He always brings assistance, always checks if I am truly unconscious before administering the doses." It was then that Meg had a dangerous idea. What if you pretended to be dead?" Edmund looked at her in surprise. "What? Think about it. If Dr. Morrison believed you had died during the night, he wouldn't administer any more medication. You could recover completely, and then—" She paused, realizing the flaws in her own plan. "No, that's madness. They would hold a funeral, bury you." "Not necessarily." Edmund's eyes began to shine with something she hadn't seen before, genuine hope. "If I died during the night, Lady Catherine would be the first to be notified. And I have my suspicions about where Catherine's true loyalties lie." "You think she's not on Blackwood's side?" "Catherine served my family for 20 years. She was my mother's lady-in-waiting. She looked after me when I was a child. If there is anyone in this castle who could be convinced to help the true king—" Edmund squeezed Meg's hand. "It is risky. If we are wrong about Catherine, we will be placing our lives in the hands of our enemies. And if we do nothing, you will die slowly in this bed, while your kingdom is handed over to foreigners." They looked at each other in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them like a storm cloud. Finally, Edmund smiled, the first truly hopeful smile Meg had seen on his face. "Then that's it. Tomorrow night, Edmund of Ravenshollow will die. And after—" he brought her hand to his lips, gently kissing her fingers. "And after, we will discover what we are truly capable of when we fight together." Meg felt a wave of emotion so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. It wasn't just the touch of his lips on her skin. though that made her heart race. It was the realization that she had found not just a king to save, but a man to love, and that he, against all odds and social conventions, seemed to be starting to love her too. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we will face it together." "Together," he agreed, and for the first time since she had arrived at Ravenshade, Meg felt she was not alone in the world. She had found someone worth saving, and more importantly, someone who believed she was worth being saved too. Outside, the first light of dawn began to tint the sky a pale pink, signaling that it was time for her to return to her room. But before she left, Edmund held her hand once more. "Margaret," he said with a seriousness that made her hold her breath, "if something goes wrong, if our plan fails, I want you to know that these last few days, having you by my side, have been the most alive I have felt in 5 years." She leaned in and, without thinking of the consequences, gently kissed his forehead. "Nothing will go wrong," she whispered against his skin. "I won't allow it." And she left the room carrying in her heart the promise of a love that was growing in the shadows, strong enough to challenge usurper kings and age-old traditions. The morning of the plan dawned with an unsettling silence over Ravenshade, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. Meg awoke before dawn, her heart beating so loudly she feared it could be heard by the other inhabitants of the castle. Today, if all went well, Edmund would finally be free. If something went wrong, she preferred not to think about that possibility. Throughout the morning she performed her duties with a forced normality, but Agnes noticed her tension. "Child, you're as pale as the snow outside," the older woman said, studying Meg's face as she tried to concentrate on polishing the silverware. "Are you feeling well?" "Just a little tired, Agnes. I didn't sleep well." Agnes moved closer, lowering her voice. "Does it have to do with the noises in the East Tower? I heard them again last night, as if someone were moving." Meg's heart nearly stopped. If Agnes had heard sounds coming from the royal chambers, what kind of noises? Footsteps, low voices, as if— Agnes paused, looking around to make sure they were alone. "As if our poor king were trying to wake up." Before Meg could reply, Lady Catherine's icy voice cut through the air. "Agnes, your services are needed in the pantry." "Immediately." The older woman gave a quick curtsy and left, but not before casting a worried glance at Meg. Catherine approached slowly, her steel eyes fixed on Meg's face as if trying to read every secret thought. "Margaret, I need to speak with you, in private." They walked in silence to the library, and Catherine closed the door behind them with a definitive click. "Sit!" the governess ordered, but there was something different in her voice, less coldness, more concern. Meg obeyed, her hands trembling slightly. "How long have you known?" The question came without preamble. "Known what, milady?" "Do not insult me with lies, child. How long have you known that our king is not in a coma?" Meg's world seemed to tilt dangerously. Catherine knew. Somehow the governess had found out. Meg began, but Catherine raised a hand to silence her. "I have seen you, Margaret, not once but several times." Leaving the royal chambers in the early hours of the morning, Catherine walked to the window, gazing at the snow-covered gardens. "Initially, I thought it was just youthful curiosity, but then I started noticing other things. Edmund was different, less lethargic during Dr. Morrison's visits, as if he were fighting the sedation." Meg remained silent, trying to decide whether to deny everything or— "He is awakening, isn't he?" Catherine turned to face her directly. "Slowly, but he is regaining consciousness." It was then that Meg made the riskiest decision of her life. She looked into Catherine's eyes and told the truth. Yes, he is awake, and he knows about Blackwood's conspiracy. To her surprise, Catherine did not seem shocked. Instead, the older woman closed her eyes as if feeling immense relief. "Thank God," she whispered. "I had hoped, but I dared not believe." "You knew?" Meg rose from her chair. "All this time you knew he was being poisoned?" "I suspected, but suspecting and proving are different things." Catherine sat down again, and for the first time since Meg had met her, the governess looked vulnerable. "I have served the royal family for 20 years, child. I saw Edmund grow from a sweet boy into a noble and just man. When he fell ill so suddenly, right after he began questioning certain of Blackwood's decisions, the coincidences were too much to ignore. Why didn't you do anything?" "And do what?" Catherine's voice carried a deep bitterness. "I am just a governess. Blackwood controlled the doctors, the guards, the entire castle administration. Any accusation I made without concrete proof would be dismissed as the fantasy of a hysterical woman." Meg approached, her heart racing with a dangerous hope. But now Edmund is awake. He can testify. He is not yet strong enough, Catherine interrupted, and Blackwood is growing impatient. Last night I overheard a conversation between him and Dr. Morrison. They are planning to accelerate the process. What does that mean? Catherine hesitated, then said in a low voice, "It means they're planning to declare Edmund dead within the next few days. They'll claim his condition deteriorated overnight." Meg's blood ran cold. "Are they going to kill him?" "Not directly, but an accidental overdose of a sedative would be easily explainable. And once Edmund is officially declared dead, Blackwood will become the rightful heir to the throne." Meg began to pace, her mind working frantically. "Catherine, Edmund and I have a plan. It's risky, but tell me." Meg quickly explained the plan to fake Edmund's death, hoping Catherine could be the key to its success. Catherine listened in silence, her eyes narrowing as she considered the implications. "It is dangerous," she said finally. "If Blackwood discovers we are deceiving him, if we do nothing, Edmund will die anyway, and the kingdom will be handed over to foreigners." Catherine was silent for a long moment, looking out the window toward the East Tower where her true king was imprisoned. Finally, she turned to Meg, with determination shining in her eyes. "Then let's do it. Tonight, when Dr. Morrison comes for his evening visit, I will make sure he finds Edmund, apparently, at eternal rest. And after? After, my dear, we will find out if 20 years of loyalty still mean anything in this cursed castle." But as they made their final plans, neither of them noticed the shadow moving on the other side of the library door, nor did they hear the silent footsteps retreating down the corridor. Lord Blackwood had heard enough, and he had his own plans for that night. Night fell upon Ravenshade like a black cloak embroidered with icy stars, and with it came the weight of a destiny about to unfold. Meg had spent the day in an agony of anticipation, each minute dragging on like an eternity. Now hidden in the small closet adjacent to the royal chambers, she awaited Catherine's signal to put the plan into action. Edmund lay on the bed, his eyes shining with alertness in the golden gloom of the candles. They had rehearsed everything carefully. He would control his breathing to make it seem as if he had stopped, keep his body completely still, leave his eyes half open so that he looked gone. "Are you sure Catherine is on our side?" Edmund whispered one last time. "I am," Meg replied with more conviction than she truly felt. "She served your family for 20 years. She loves you." The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor made them both tense. Dr. Morrison had arrived for his evening visit, carrying his black leather medical bag as always, the same bag that for 5 years had carried the poisons that kept Edmund a prisoner in his own body. Meg shrank deeper into the closet, watching through a small crack in the door. Dr. Morrison entered the chambers with the casual confidence of someone who had repeated the same routine hundreds of times. He was a thin, nervous man in his 50s, with thinning grey hair and small glasses that gave him a rodent-like appearance. His movements were precise, mechanical, the efficiency of someone who had turned an atrocity into a routine. "Good evening, Your Majesty," he muttered sarcastically as he approached the bed. "Time for your medicine." But as he leaned over Edmund to check his pulse, a standard procedure before administering the sedation, something made him stop abruptly. "What?" Dr. Morrison placed his hand on Edmund's chest, then on his neck. His eyes widened behind his glasses. "No, it's not possible." It was then that Lady Catherine entered the room, moving with her usual elegance. "Dr. Morrison, is there a problem?" "Lady Catherine, he's—" Morrison backed away from the bed, his voice trembling. "I can't find a pulse. He is dead." Catherine approached the bed with the controlled shock of a woman accustomed to hiding her emotions. She leaned over Edmund, placed a hand on his heart and checked for his breath. "God help us," she whispered with convincing despair. "When was the last time you checked his vital signs?" "This morning. He was stable this morning, I swear." Morrison was clearly panicking. "It must have happened just a short while ago. The body is still warm." "Are you certain that he is—" Catherine left the question hanging. Morrison returned to the bed, repeating all the checks with trembling hands. No pulse, no respiration, no pupil response. Yes, he is gone. Catherine moved away from the bed, placing a hand on her chest in a perfect display of a woman in shock. "I must inform Lord Blackwood immediately. He will need to make the necessary arrangements." Her voice carried the authority of decades of experience in crisis situations. "Doctor, can you determine the cause?" Morrison was packing his instruments with nervous movements. "Cardiac arrest, most likely. After so many years in a vegetative state, it is not—" not entirely unexpected. The heart simply stopped. "I understand. You may leave the immediate arrangements to me. Lord Blackwood will want to be informed personally." After Morrison left, clearly shaken, Catherine remained motionless beside the bed for a long moment. Only when the doctor's footsteps had completely faded down the distant corridors did she move. "You can come out," she said in a low voice. Meg emerged from the closet on shaky legs, and Edmund slowly opened his eyes, returning to life with a deep breath. "Perfect," Catherine said with a smile that held none of her usual ice. Morrison was so nervous he barely managed a proper examination. Edmund sat up in bed, still a little dizzy from the effort of holding his breath for so long. "How much time do we have before Blackwood gets here?" "Not much. Morrison will run to inform him immediately." Catherine approached the window, observing the courtyard below. "You need to leave the castle tonight. I have horses prepared in the back stables, provisions, enough money for you to reach Millbrook and from there on to the capital." "Catherine," Edmund stood up from the bed, still a bit unsteady, "I cannot flee. This is my kingdom, my people. I cannot abandon them to Blackwood." "And of what use is a dead king to his people?" Catherine replied firmly. "You are still too weak to face Blackwood directly. You need time to recover fully, to gather loyal allies, to—" She stopped abruptly, her face paling. "What is it?" Meg asked. Catherine pointed to the window. Down below in the courtyard, torches were moving in organized formation, many torches. "Guards," she whispered. "Blackwood brought guards." It was then that the chamber door burst open, and Lord Blackwood entered, followed by 6 armed men. His face bore a look of predatory satisfaction that made Meg's stomach churn. "Well, well," he said in that velvet-smooth voice that hid so much poison. "It seems our dear king has had a miraculous recovery." Edmund drew himself up with all the dignity he could muster, and for the first time, Meg saw in him not just the man she had learned to love, but the king he was born to be. "Blackwood," he said in a firm voice, "your days of treason are over." Blackwood laughed, a sound that held no human warmth. "On the contrary, your majesty, it is your days that have come to an end." Again, he gestured to the guards. "Seize them, all 3 of them." As the guards approached, Catherine took a step forward. "Lord Blackwood, I can explain—" "Can you, really?" Blackwood moved toward her, his eyes blazing with cold fury. 20 years serving this family, Catherine, and in the end, you choose to betray them alongside an orphan servant and a king who should have died long ago." "I have never betrayed the true royal family," Catherine answered with unshakable dignity. "The betrayal was yours, Aldrich. Yours from the first day you decided you coveted a throne that would never belong to you." It was then that Edmund did something no one expected. With a swift movement, he grabbed the nearest silver candlestick and hurled it at the window, shattering the glass. "People of Ravenshollow," he shouted, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "Your king lives! Edmund of Ravenshollow lives!" For a moment, silence reigned over the castle. Then, from the courtyard below, voices began to rise, confused at first, then growing in volume and clarity. "The king! The king is alive!" Blackwood turned to Edmund with murderous fury in his eyes. "You have just signed your own death warrant, you fool, and theirs as well." But outside the voices continued to grow, and among them Meg could hear one she recognized, Agnes, shouting for all to hear. "The king lives! Our true king is alive!" The revolution had begun. The sound of the voices in the courtyard grew like a tempestuous tide, echoing off the ancient stones of Ravenshade, with a force that seemed capable of toppling walls. Edmund remained at the shattered window, his figure illuminated by the torches below, and for the first time in 5 years, he truly looked like a king, not just by birth, but by his own will. "Guards!" Blackwood roared, but his voice now carried a note of desperation he couldn't completely hide. "Seize him! Now!" But the men hesitated. From the courtyard rose not only the clamor of the people, but also familiar voices. Other guards, castle servants, people who had served the royal family for generations. And they were all shouting the same thing. "The king lives! Edmund of Ravenshollow lives!" One of the guards, an older man with battle scars on his face, lowered his sword. "My lord," he said to Blackwood, "if the king is truly alive—" "He is an impostor!" Blackwood exploded. 5 years in a coma, do you think anyone could survive that? It's a trick, a farce orchestrated by enemies of the kingdom. But Edmund turned from the window, and the candlelight revealed a man who, despite his pallor and weakness, possessed an undeniable regal presence. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of one born to command. "Captain Aldrich," he addressed the older guard, "you served my father during the War of the Blackstones. You were there when he first taught me to use a sword, in the armory courtyard when I was 12. You said I had the hands of a musician, not a warrior." The captain's eyes widened. It was an intimate, personal memory that only the true prince could know. "Your Majesty," he whispered in a trembling voice. "And you, soldier Marcus." Edmund turned to another guard. "Your sister works in the kitchen. Livia. She makes the best cinnamon bread in the kingdom, and I used to steal slices as a child. You always threatened to tell my father, but you never did." Marcus let his sword fall with a metallic clang that echoed like a death knell for Blackwood's hopes. "How is this possible?" he whispered. 5 years. 5 years a prisoner in my own body," Edmund said, his voice carrying all the pain of that lost time. "Kept unconscious by medications administered by Dr. Morrison under the orders of Lord Blackwood, while my kingdom was slowly sold off to foreign powers." Blackwood backed away, realizing he had lost the guards, but there was a desperation in him that made him more dangerous, not less. "You have no proof," he shouted. "These are just the words of a man who should be dead." It was then that Catherine moved. From the drawer of a nearby chest, she retrieved a leather portfolio that made Blackwood turn visibly pale. "All the letters," she said calmly. "All the correspondence between you and your foreign allies. Copies of the documents you forged in the king's name. Records of the medications you ordered Dr. Morrison to administer. How did you—" 20 years of serving this family has taught me to be prepared for any eventuality, Aldrich, including your treason." Edmund approached Blackwood, and despite his physical weakness, there was a moral strength in him that made the traitor retreat. "Aldrich," he said with deep sadness, "you were my father's friend. I trusted you like a second father. Why?" For a moment, Blackwood's mask slipped, revealing not the calculating villain, but a man consumed by bitterness. "Because I was better than you," he exploded. "Older, wiser, more experienced. Your father should have named me his heir, not a spoiled boy who never knew what it was to fight for anything. And for that, you would hand my people over to foreigners. For that, you would condemn thousands of innocents. Your people will be better off under a strong government, under someone who understands that sentimentality is weakness." It was at that moment that Meg, who had remained silent watching the scene unfold, made a decision that would change everything. She approached Edmund and, in front of everyone, guards, Catherine, even Blackwood, took his hand in hers. "Your Majesty," she said in a clear, firm voice, "your kingdom needs you. But you need someone by your side, someone who loves you not for the throne you hold, but for the man you are." A murmur of shock passed through those present. An orphan servant publicly declaring her love for a king. It was unthinkable, scandalous, against all traditions and social laws. But Edmund smiled, the first truly joyous smile Meg had seen on his face. "Margaret Whitmore," he said, raising his voice for all to hear, "you saved me not only from chemical imprisonment, but from the prison of loneliness. You proved to me that true nobility lies not in blood, but in actions. And if my kingdom cannot accept that—" He turned to the guards, to Catherine, looking each of them in the eye. "Then perhaps it is time for our kingdom to learn that a new era has arrived. An era where merit is worth more than birth, where loyalty is worth more than title." Captain Aldrich knelt first, then Marcus. One by one, all the guards present knelt before their true king. From the courtyard, the voices continued to swell. The people of Ravenshollow had found their voice, and it cried out for justice, for truth, for a king who chose love over convenience. Catherine approached Edmund and Meg, tears shining in her usually controlled eyes. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "it will be a battle. The traditional nobles will resist. There will be those who question your choices." "Let them question," Edmund replied, squeezing Meg's hand. "We will face whatever comes together, as we have faced everything until now." Blackwood, seeing his cause was lost, made one last desperate move. He drew a hidden dagger and lunged at Edmund. But Meg was faster. She pushed Edmund aside and faced Blackwood, grabbing his wrist as he struggled to drive the blade home. It was Captain Aldrich who stopped him, disarming him with an expert move. "Lord Aldrich Blackwood," Edmund said in a solemn voice, "you are under arrest for treason against the crown, conspiracy with foreign powers, and the attempted murder of the king." Blackwood was led away by the guards, but his final words echoed ominously through the chambers. "You may have won today, Edmund, but kingdoms are not built on the love of servants. You will find that being a king is harder than waking from a sleep." When they were alone, just Edmund, Meg, and Catherine, A contemplative silence fell over the room. "He's not entirely wrong," Edmund said finally. "It will be difficult. There will be resistance." Meg walked to the broken window, watching the people still gathered in the courtyard, their voices now singing hymns of celebration. "Perhaps," she said softly. "But look down there. Look at the people who spent 5 years without their true king and still remember his name. If that isn't a kingdom built on love, I don't know what is." Edmund joined her at the window, and together they watched the dawn of a new era for Ravenshollow, an era born not of politics or convenience, but of courage, sacrifice, and the belief that some things are worth more than all the conventions in the world. 3 months had passed since the night Edmund returned from the realm of shadows to reclaim his throne, and Ravenshade Castle had awakened from its own deep slumber. Where once only melancholic silences echoed, laughter and conversation now resounded. The tapestries had been restored, the fireplaces danced again with welcoming flames, and life had returned to the corridors that had for so long known only the ghosts of memories. Meg was in the royal library, no longer as an orphan servant fleeing the ghosts of her past, but as the future Queen of Ravenshollow, studying state treaties and diplomatic correspondence. The irony was not lost on her. The young woman who had learned to read on the lap of a simple mother now deciphered the political complexities of entire kingdoms. Edmund found her there, as he did every afternoon, sitting silently beside her as she worked. In these 3 months he had been completely transformed. The sickly pallor had been replaced by a healthy vigor. The muscles atrophied by long captivity had been strengthened with daily exercise, and his eyes shone with the clarity of one who had found his purpose. "Lord Brennan's replies arrived today," he said, handing her a sealed letter. "Our former allies are cautiously optimistic about renewing traditional relations." Meg quickly read the document, her political reading skills sharpened by months of intensive practice. Cautiously optimistic is a political euphemism for "we still don't know if you'll survive long enough to be worth investing in your friendship," she translated with an ironic smile. Edmund laughed, a sound that still made her heart race, no matter how many times she heard it. "My future wife is becoming dangerously adept at diplomatic duplicity. Someone has to protect you from the wolves in sheep's clothing." He leaned in to gently kiss her hair. "And how are the other resistances?" Meg sighed. The past few months had not only been about restoring the kingdom, they had been about battling centuries of tradition and prejudice. Edmund's decision to marry an orphan servant had sent shockwaves through the entire nobility of Ravenshollow. "Lord Harwick has officially withdrawn his daughter from court," she reported, without lifting her eyes from the parchment. "Apparently, Lady Vivian cannot bear the humiliation of serving a queen of such modest origins. And does that bother you?" Meg considered the question honestly. In the first few days after their engagement was announced, she had cried bitter tears over the cruel whispers and disdainful looks. But Agnes had given her a piece of advice that had completely changed her perspective. "Child, they are not angry because you are not good enough for him. They are angry because you proved that he doesn't need them." "Not anymore," she finally answered. "At first, yes, I felt like an imposter wearing silk dresses and learning royal etiquette. But then I realized something." "What?" Meg turned to face him directly. "That I didn't become worthy of you by learning to wear a crown. I was already worthy when I had the courage to seek the truth, when I risked my life to save you, when I chose to stand by your side even knowing it would be easier to run away." Edmund held her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Margaret Whitmore, you never cease to amaze me. It's good to know I'll be able to keep you interested for the next 50 years. "At least 50, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that still had the power to make the world around them disappear. They were interrupted by a discreet knock on the door. Catherine entered, carrying a tray of tea and a smile that had in recent months become genuinely warm. "Pardon the interruption, Your Majesties, but the tailor has arrived for the final fittings of the coronation gown." Meg groaned dramatically. "More fittings? I swear I've been pricked by more pins than a voodoo doll." "The price of royalty, my dear," Catherine said with dry humor. "Though I must admit you have endured the tortures of high fashion with more grace than many ladies born to it." It was true. In the past few months, Meg had transformed not just externally, learning to walk with the posture of a queen, to speak with the authority of a ruler, to wear silks as if born to them, but internally as well. She had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, a capacity for leadership that surprised even Edmund. "In fact," Catherine continued, Lady Agnes asked to see you in the kitchen when you have a moment. Something about the arrangements for the coronation feast." Meg smiled. Agnes had been promoted to general supervisor of the royal household, a position she held with the fierce pride of someone who had backed the right king from the start. "Tell her I will come as soon as I finish reviewing this correspondence." After Catherine left, Edmund returned to his chair, but Meg noticed that something was weighing on his mind. "What is it?" she asked. "I was thinking about Blackwood." The name still had the power to cast a shadow over any conversation. The former regent was imprisoned in the South Tower, awaiting trial for high treason. Dr. Morrison had confessed completely, implicating not only Blackwood, but a whole network of corrupt nobles and foreign agents. What about him? He said something that night, about kingdoms not being built on love. Sometimes I wonder if he was right. Meg completed the sentence. Edmund nodded, clearly reluctant to voice the doubt. Meg stood up and walked to the window overlooking the castle gardens. Outside, servants worked cheerfully, preparing the grounds for the coronation ceremony. Children ran among the flowers, while their mothers arranged decorations. There was laughter, songs, a sense of hope that had been absent for 5 long years. "Edmund," she said without turning, "do you see those people out there?" "Yes. They are working not because they have to, but because they want our coronation to be perfect. Agnes has been in the kitchen since dawn preparing banquets for people she will never personally meet. Catherine is coordinating every detail as if her own life depended on it." She turned to face him. "They do it for you, yes, but they also do it for me. And they do it because they see in our love proof that their own dreams can also come true. That an orphan servant can become a queen means a peasant's son can become a knight. That a seamstress can become a merchant. That merit can overcome birth," Edmund finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly. Blackwood was wrong, Edmund. Kingdoms can indeed be built on love, not just our love for each other, but the love we inspire in our people, the hope we give them that a better world is possible." Edmund stood up and embraced her, resting his chin on the top of her head. "How did you become so wise?" "I learned from a king who had the courage to awaken from a 5-year sleep to save his kingdom, and I learned from a young woman who had the courage to awaken a king." Outside, the tower bells began to chime, marking the end of another day and the beginning of a new one in the kingdom they were building together. Brick by brick, decision by decision, gesture of love by gesture of love. In a week, Meg would be crowned Queen of Raven's Hollow. But in that moment, held in the arms of the man she loved as they looked out over the kingdom they would rule together, she already felt like the richest person in the world. The day of the coronation dawned with a crystal-clear blue sky, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating the rebirth of Raven's Hollow. Ravenshade Castle had never seen such magnificence. Royal banners fluttered from every tower, flowers cascaded in colourful waterfalls through the gardens, and the aroma of banquets being prepared wafted through the corridors like the perfume of a festival. Meg awoke in her chambers, now the chambers of the future queen, with her heart beating a mix of anxiety and ecstasy. Today, in just a few hours, she would cease to be Margaret Whitmore, the orphan servant, and become Queen Margaret of Raven's Hollow. The transformation felt as surreal as a dream. Agnes entered, carrying a tray of tea and biscuits, but her eyes were red with restrained emotion. "My girl," she said in a trembling voice, "this is the day." "Agnes!" Meg sat up in bed, reaching her hands out to the woman who had become more than a friend. She had become the mother she had lost. "Are you crying?" "Tears of joy, child, tears of joy." Agnes set the tray aside and hugged Meg with the tenderness of someone embracing a daughter. "Your parents, they would be so proud to see the extraordinary woman you have become." Meg's own tears began to flow. In the past few months, there had been moments when she felt as though she were betraying her parents' memory by straying so far from the simple world where she was born. But Agnes always reminded her that Thomas and Mary Whitmore had not raised a daughter to remain small. They had raised her to fly as high as her dreams would allow. "They would have loved Edmund," Meg said, wiping her tears. "And he would have loved them too, child. A king who can see the true worth of people is the kind of man your parents would have chosen for you." Catherine appeared at the door, impeccable in a dark blue gown embroidered in silver. "Pardon the intrusion, but we must begin the preparations. Royal ceremony does not forgive tardiness." In the hours that followed, Meg was transformed by skilled hands into a version of herself that seemed to have stepped out of a fairy tale. The coronation gown was a work of art, pure white satin embroidered with gold and silver threads, forming patterns of roses and oak leaves that symbolized both beauty and strength. The skirt flowed like crystal water, and the bodice fit as if it had been made by the angels themselves. But it was when they placed the veil, yards of the finest lace that had belonged to Edmund's mother, that Meg truly felt transformed. "My goodness," Catherine whispered, stepping back to admire the final result. "You look magnificent." Meg looked at herself in the mirror and for a moment did not recognize the woman staring back. But then she saw something familiar in the golden eyes, the quiet determination she had inherited from her blacksmith father, the deep kindness she had learned from her mother, and a new strength she had discovered alongside Edmund. She was no longer the orphan servant, nor just a future queen. She was Margaret, complete in herself. "It is time," Catherine announced softly. The procession to the royal chapel was like walking through a golden dream. Rose petals rained down from the windows as Meg passed through the corridors she knew so well, but now transformed by ceremonial tapestries and candles that created a magical atmosphere. Servants and nobles bowed as she passed, but it was not reverence for her new title alone. There was genuine love in those gazes, gratitude for her having saved their true king. In the chapel, hundreds of guests rose to their feet as she entered, but Meg only had eyes for one person. Edmund waiting for her at the altar, in his royal dark blue and gold vestments, his crown gleaming in the candlelight, but his eyes shining even more brightly with love and pride. When she reached the altar, he took her hand and whispered for her ears only, "Ready for this adventure, my brave librarian?" "Ready for any adventure by your side, my awakened king," she replied with a smile that made his heart race. "Dearly beloved," he began in a solemn voice that echoed off the chapel's ancient stones, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and this noble assembly to witness the coronation of our beloved Margaret as Queen of Ravenshollow, and to bless the union that will guide our kingdom into a new era of hope and justice." When it was time for the royal vows, Edmund took Meg's hands in his and spoke words that were not in any ceremonial protocol, but that came directly from his heart. "Margaret, you taught me that a true kingdom is not built on stone and gold, but on courage and love." The ceremony was conducted by Archbishop Thornton, a venerable man who had known Edmund since childhood, and who had wept tears of joy upon learning of the king's miraculous return. "I promise to rule by your side not only as your king, but as your partner in every decision, in every dream, in every challenge we face." Tears streamed freely down Meg's cheeks as she replied, "Edmund, you taught me that we need not be born to greatness to achieve it. We need only have the courage to awaken to our own worth. I promise to stand by your side as your queen, your advisor, your best friend, and above all as the woman who will love you until the end of time." When the Archbishop placed the Queen's crown upon Meg's head, a crown more delicate than the king's but no less significant, made of white gold and adorned with stones that captured the light like stars, a reverent silence fell over the chapel. "May God bless our Queen Margaret of Ravenshollow, and may her reign be marked by wisdom, compassion, and prosperity for all her subjects." The amen that echoed through the chapel was like thunder, followed by applause that seemed capable of bringing down the walls. But the most moving moment came when Edmund and Meg exited the chapel to be presented to the people gathered in the grand courtyard. Thousands of people were crowded there, peasants who had traveled for days to witness the coronation, merchants from neighboring towns, nobles from allied kingdoms, and all the castle servants who had helped make the day possible. When Edmund raised Meg's hand in the air, the roar of approval was deafening. But it was when a voice shouted from the middle of the crowd, "Long live the people's queen," that Meg truly understood what she had achieved. It was not just a title. It was the love of an entire kingdom that saw in her the proof that dreams can come true. The banquet that followed was a celebration that would go down in the history of Ravenshollow. Agnes had outdone herself, creating a feast that would be remembered for generations. But the most touching moment came when Edmund rose to make a toast. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying throughout the great hall, "today we celebrate not just a coronation. We celebrate the awakening of a kingdom that had forgotten its own dreams." He turned to Meg, his eyes shining with an emotion that made her heart stop. "And we celebrate a woman who had the courage to awaken a sleeping king. Not with a fairy tale kiss, but with something far more powerful. Unwavering faith in the truth and a love that knows no bounds." The hall erupted in applause, but Edmund was not yet finished. "Margaret has taught me that true nobility lies not in the blood that runs in our veins, but in the choices we make every day. And I choose every day to be worthy of this extraordinary woman's love." When they finally sat down, Meg whispered to him, "If you keep making speeches like that, I'm going to cry so much my crown will slip." Edmund laughed and gently kissed her forehead. "Then I will stop talking and start dancing with my queen." The first royal dance was magical. Twirling through the hall decorated with flowers and lit by 1,000 candles, Meg felt as if she were floating. But it wasn't the grandeur of the moment that moved her. It was the way Edmund looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world. "No regrets?" he asked as they danced. "Only one," she replied. "What's that?" "I wish my parents were here to see this moment." Edmund stopped dancing for a moment, holding her face in his hands. "They are, my love. Say in every kind gesture you make, in every wise decision you take, in every moment you choose compassion over vengeance, they live on through the extraordinary woman they raised." And for the first time since she had arrived at Ravenshade as a frightened orphan, Meg felt truly whole, not because she had found a title or a crown, but because she had found her place in the world, at the side of the man she loved, serving the people she had learned to love as well. The celebration continued until the first light of dawn, but for Meg and Edmund, the real beginning was just starting. 6 months after the coronation, as autumn painted the gardens of Ravenshade in hues of gold and crimson, a delegation arrived in the kingdom that would change everything Edmund and Meg thought they knew about the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed Raven's Hollow. Meg was in the library, now expanded and transformed into a royal centre for study, when Catherine burst through the halls with an expression she hadn't seen since the dark days of the discovery about Blackwood. "Your Majesty," Catherine said, clearly agitated, "there are envoys at court. They have come from the kingdom of Aldemir in the north." Meg frowned. Aldemir had been one of the allied kingdoms in Blackwood's conspiracy. "What kind of envoys?" They have brought documents. Documents that, according to them, completely change our understanding of what happened during His Majesty's 5-year coma." Edmund appeared in the library at that moment, having clearly run through the corridors. His hair was disheveled and there was a tension in his eyes that Meg hadn't seen in months. "Did you hear about the envoys?" he asked. "Catherine just told me." "What are these documents?" "Intercepted correspondence. Plans that go far beyond what we ever imagined." Edmund approached the window, looking down at the courtyard, where a black carriage waited, guarded by men in foreign armour. "Margaret, do you remember Lord Brennan, one of Blackwood's correspondents?" "Of course, the one who was planning the new territorial arrangements. He is dead, murdered 3 weeks ago in his own chambers." Edmund turned to face her, and Meg saw something that frightened her, genuine fear. And he wasn't the only one. 4 of the nobles involved in the conspiracy have died under mysterious circumstances in the last month. Meg's blood ran cold. "Do you think someone is eliminating the witnesses?" "Worse than that." Catherine approached, lowering her voice. "The envoys from Aldemir claim that Blackwood was not the leader of the conspiracy. He was merely a pawn in a much larger game." Edmund nodded gravely. "They want to show us proof that there is a secret organization operating across multiple kingdoms, manipulating royal successions, creating wars, controlling trade routes. An organization that is still active," Catherine finished. Meg felt the world tilt beneath her feet. For months she had believed the threat had passed with Blackwood's imprisonment, that they could finally rule in peace, build the kingdom they dreamed of. "They want to meet with us now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, and Margaret." Edmund hesitated, as if the next words were difficult to say. "They say you are in danger. Specifically you." "Me? Why?" "Because your rise from servant to queen was not just seen as a love story. It was seen as a dangerous precedent, a threat to the established order that this organization works to maintain." Catherine placed a hand on Meg's shoulder. "They believe you can inspire other common people to question the legitimacy of the hereditary nobility, and that threatens the entire power system they control." Meg sank into a chair, the weight of the revelation almost unbearable. For months, she had worried about internal resistance, adapting to royal protocol, petty court intrigues. She had never imagined that her very existence as queen could be seen as a threat by hidden forces operating beyond Raven's Hollow's borders. "What kind of danger?" she finally asked. Edmund knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "We don't know yet, but the recent murders, they were all made to look like accidents or natural deaths. Sophisticated, planned, executed by professionals." "Edmund," Meg said slowly, a terrible realization forming in her mind. "If this organization is so powerful, How do we know we can trust these envoys from Aldemir? How do we know this isn't another trap? It was a question that had clearly already tormented Edmund. We don't, he admitted, but they brought something that made us believe in their sincerity. What? Catherine moved to the table and removed an object from a folder that made Meg hold her breath, a silver locket she recognized instantly. Impossible, she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the piece. This locket, it was my mother's. The envoy said it was found among Lord Brennan's personal effects, Edmund explained softly. Margaret, there are possibilities about your family, about who your parents really were. That could change everything we think we know about why you were brought to Ravenshade. Meg looked at the locket, a simple silver disc with an engraved rose, which her mother had said was a family keepsake of no great importance. But now, seeing it among documents of international conspiracies, cast her entire life in a completely different light. Are you suggesting that I didn't arrive here by chance? That my hiring as a servant was planned? It's possible, Edmund said, his voice filled with a protective gentleness. But if it was, we need to find out why. And if you are truly in danger, we need to know where the threat is coming from and how to protect you. Meg rose from the chair, walking to the window where she could see the gardens she had learned to love, the kingdom that had become her home, the people she had sworn to serve. The idea that invisible forces could be manipulating her life, her love story, even her ascension to the throne, was almost unbearable. But then, looking at Edmund and Catherine, the two people she trusted most in the world, she felt the same determination that had guided her on the night she decided to save a sleeping king. Then let's find out the truth, she said, turning to face them with eyes that shone with a fierce courage. Whatever that truth is, we will face it together, as we always have. Edmund approached her, wrapping her in his arms. Are you sure? Once we open this door, we may not be able to close it again. Meg looked once more at her mother's locket, then at the man she loved, then at the woman who had become her family. The truth has never destroyed anyone who was strong enough to face it, she said with absolute conviction. And the three of us, and we have already proven we are strong enough for anything. Outside, the envoy's black carriage waited in the courtyard, laden with secrets that could rewrite not only Meg's personal history, but the entire future of Raven's Hollow. And inside the library, three people who had learned to trust each other above all else prepared to face the revelation that would change their lives forever. The private audience chamber had never witnessed such a tense meeting. The envoys from Aldemir, three middle-aged men dressed in sober but clearly expensive clothes, sat on one side of the large oak table, while Edmund and Meg occupied the other, with Catherine standing by like a silent sentinel. The leader of the delegation, who had identified himself as Sir Marcus Thornfield, no relation to Catherine despite the common surname, opened a leather portfolio and began to spread documents across the table like someone assembling a complex puzzle. Your Majesties, he began in a grave voice, what you're about to hear today will challenge everything you believed about the events that led to King Edmund's awakening. Meg squeezed Edmund's hand under the table, feeling them both brace for revelations that could change everything. This organization we mentioned, Sir Marcus continued, calls itself the Order of the Golden Raven. It has existed for over 2 centuries, operating in the shadows of European courts, manipulating successions, creating and dissolving alliances, always with one goal: to maintain a balance of power that allows them to control trade routes and political decisions. He pointed to a detailed map showing connections between various kingdoms. Lord Blackwood was not an ambitious conspirator acting alone. He was an agent of the Order, tasked with delivering Ravenshollow to them as part of a larger plan to control all the northern trade routes. Edmund leaned forward. And my forced coma. It was necessary because Your Majesty had begun to investigate irregularities that could have exposed not just the local operation, but the Order's entire network. Sir Marcus produced a sealed letter. This is an intercepted correspondence between the Order's headquarters and Blackwood 3 days before Your Majesty was sedated. Edmund read the letter, and his face paled. He passed the document to Meg, whose expression mirrored his. The letter was clear and brutal. The young king has become a problem. Proceed with the permanent sleep solution. Maintain until arrangements are complete. Then proceed with the final solution. Final solution, Meg repeated in a hoarse voice. Murder, Sir Marcus confirmed bluntly. Blackwood was supposed to have killed the king as soon as the treaties were signed, but he became complacent. He enjoyed the power, the control, and he kept postponing the inevitable. Catherine approached the table. And Margaret? What was her role in all of this? It was then that Sir Marcus retrieved the silver locket and placed it carefully on the table. "Lady Margaret," he said, looking directly at her, "your mother was not a simple lady-in-waiting from a modest family." Meg felt her heart race dangerously. She was Lady Mary Rosehaven, youngest daughter of the Duke of Whitmore, one of the leaders of the resistance against the Order of the Golden Raven. Meg's world seemed to stop. "That's impossible. My mother she was simple, common. She chose to be simple," Sir Marcus corrected gently. "When she discovered that the Order had infiltrated her own ducal family and that her father had been murdered for opposing them, she fled. She married your father, Thomas Whitmore, a good man who loved her without questioning her past. They lived in peace for years." "Then why—" Meg's voice failed her. "Why did she die?" Sir Marcus sighed. "The Order found her. The fever that killed your parents was not natural, Your Majesty. It was poison." Tears began to stream down Meg's cheeks. Her entire life had been built on lies, manipulations, tragedies, orchestrated by people she didn't even know. "But there is more," Sir Marcus continued. "Before she died, your mother made arrangements to protect you." Edmund held Meg's hand more tightly. "What kind of arrangements?" "Lady Catherine," Sir Marcus turned to the governess, who turned visibly pale. "Do you want to tell them, or shall I?" Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the courage for a confession she had kept for years. "I knew your mother, Margaret," she finally said in a trembling voice. "Lady Mary was my best friend in our youth before she disappeared. When she learned she was being hunted by the Order, she sent me a letter asking me to protect you if anything happened to her." "You?" Meg stood up from her chair. "You knew who I was when I arrived here. I knew you were Mary's daughter, but I did not know about your true noble lineage until we received this information from Sir Marcus." Catherine approached, tears shining in her eyes. "Your hiring as a servant was no coincidence, Margaret. It was the only way I could find to bring you to the castle and keep you safe without arousing the Order's suspicions." Edmund stood up as well, placing himself between Meg and the rest of the group, as if he could shield her from the weight of these revelations. "Let me understand this," he said in a controlled but dangerous voice. "Margaret was placed here as part of a plan to protect her. But somehow she ended up being the key piece that triggered this whole process that led to my liberation." Sir Marcus nodded. "The irony is extraordinary, is it not? The Order orchestrated so much suffering, killed so many people, manipulated so many events, and in the end it was the daughter of one of their greatest enemies who destroyed all their plans." Meg was silent, processing information that rewrote her entire understanding of herself. She was not an orphan servant who had found love with a king. She was an exiled noblewoman who had, unknowingly, avenged her parents' deaths and saved the kingdom that was hers by birthright. "There is one more thing," Sir Marcus said softly. "The Order knows who you are now. They know that you not only awakened King Edmund, but also exposed their operations. You have become a dangerous symbol to them, proof that common people can topple their most elaborate schemes. That is why they are eliminating witnesses," Edmund understood, "and that is why Lady Margaret is in extreme danger, not just for who she has become, but for who she has always been." Meg finally spoke, her voice stronger than anyone expected. "Then let them come." Everyone looked at her in surprise. "Margaret," Edmund began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "For years I lived believing I was a lucky orphan. For months I lived feeling like an imposter wearing a crown I didn't deserve." She looked at each person in the room. "But now I understand the truth. I am not an imposter. I am not a servant who got lucky. I am the daughter of people who died fighting this Order. I am the granddaughter of a duke who gave his life to protect justice." She turned to Edmund, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "And I am the queen of a people who do not deserve to live under the fear of manipulators in the shadows." Edmund smiled, the first true smile since this conversation had begun. "Then what do you suggest we do, my brave queen?" "I suggest we stop hiding and start hunting." Meg turned to Sir Marcus. "You said other kingdoms are beginning to resist the Order." "Yes, Your Majesty. An alliance is forming. Kings and queens who discovered they had been manipulated, nobles whose families were destroyed, merchants whose routes were sabotaged. Then we will join this alliance, not as victims seeking protection, but as leaders determined to end this threat once and for all." Catherine approached, placing a hand on Meg's shoulder with a mother's pride. "Lady Mary would be so proud of the woman you've become, and I am proud to call you my queen," Edmund said, taking her hand and kissing it gently. Sir Marcus began to gather the documents. "Then we have an alliance, Your Majesties. The meeting of the resistant kingdoms will take place at the next full moon in the neutral territory of Millbrook. Meg smiled upon hearing the name of her hometown. It seems fitting. Everything started there, and perhaps it is there that everything will end. 3 weeks later, when the representatives of 12 kingdoms gathered in the small town of Millbrook to form the Alliance of the Golden Light, an organization dedicated to fighting the Order of the Golden Raven, Meg stood beside Edmund, not just as his queen, but as one of the leaders of the resistance. And when they finally found and dismantled the Order's headquarters, freeing dozens of kingdoms from centuries of manipulation, Meg understood that her journey from orphan servant to warrior queen had always been about more than love. It had been about justice. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Order of the Golden Raven, they would tell the story of a young woman who had awakened a sleeping king. But Meg knew the deeper truth. She had not awakened just Edmund. She had awakened an entire era of freedom, justice and hope. And on quiet nights in Ravenshade, as she and Edmund watched their children play in the flowering gardens, she would whisper a prayer of gratitude for the parents she had lost, but who through their sacrifice had ensured that she would find not only love, but also her true purpose. The orphan servant had become a queen, the queen had become a liberator, and the liberator had learned that some destinies are so powerful that not even the most elaborate conspiracies can stop them from being fulfilled. In Ravenshade, the sun always rose golden over towers that no longer held secrets, but stories of courage, love, and the certainty that some awakenings can change the entire world.